This is The Jump Around with Pablo Iglesias and Jesse Nelson, streaming live on the ESPN Madison YouTube channel.
Wisconsin men's basketball drops a game for the first time in 7 consecutive victories. Wisconsin football causing ripples across the college football landscape. And a teddy toss coming to downtown Madison this weekend. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome into the Jump Around, ESPN Madison's Wisconsin Badgers dedicated digital show every week here on the ESPN Madison YouTube channel, usually hosted by Jim Rutledge. He is out today with some travel difficulties coming back from vacation. Aren't we all experiencing that around the country this week? So, in his place, you have me, Jesse Nelson, and Pablo Iglesias.
Hey!
Jesse and Pablo holding it down here on the Jump Around on ESPN Madison's YouTube channel. Our producers today, primetime Ryan Wollersheim and Riley Yauk, standing by in the Everlight Solar Studio here at ESPN Madison. Prime, how we doing on a Thursday afternoon?
We're doing a lot better than Jim Rutledge. Maybe landing back in Chicago.
Stuck in an airport coming back from snowy Florida. I'm nervous. So I'm going on a cruise this weekend. I am very nervous about our travel all of a sudden. Flying down to Florida. Like, I'm hoping it's all done for, but like, we're on a we got to get on that boat. They're not holding the boat for us on Sunday. Yeah. So we got to get there and go.
Yeah, I know, Pablo, you're flying out to a desert next week.
Yes, we picked great times to decide to take trips. I was just about to say, hopefully we have better non-horror travel stories to share. We'll keep our fingers crossed. Hopefully we know Jim and his family will get back safely. But yeah, hopefully this weird travel situation avoids both Jesse and I as we make our ventures next week.
And it's too bad because Jim actually went down there and found Xavier Lucas for us, and he has an exclusive interview with him.
Number one FAU NIL contributor,
but
Jim
tried
Rutledge.
to get him to double flip from Miami back to FAU after he didn't transfer to Miami from Wisconsin, but we'll get into that later.
Contracts don't mean anything these days. You can do whatever you want. Xavier Lucas, all the latest on the transfer portal or the lack thereof with the former Badgers corner. We're going to talk with CBS Sports college football writer Shehan Jeyarajah coming up in about 30 minutes from right now to get the latest on the Xavier Lucas situation. Barry Alvarez weighed in earlier this week on the Great Dane Huddle with Barry Alvarez. Lots to talk about in the world of the Wisconsin Badgers. Also, there was no Jump Around last week, so we have 2 weeks of content to catch you up on here on the Jump Around on ESPN Madison's YouTube channel. Jesse Nelson and Pablo Iglesias with you here today. So let's start with some celebratory news, Pablo. Former Wisconsin Badgers running back and ESPN Wisconsin teammate Montee Ball officially going to be inducted into the College Football Hall of Fame class of 2025. Well-deserved for Montee Ball. The journey has been an absolute you follow along the experience that he's had from his college career and everything that he's been doing thereafter. You can see how grateful he is for the honor, as you see here on our ESPN Madison YouTube channel, the tweet that he shared with some of the news that was posted from Wisconsin football as it came about. Pablo, your reaction to Montee Ball officially going into the College Football Hall of Fame.
How did this not happen sooner? Because of how just his resume, everything, what he embodied about Wisconsin football, everything that he's done afterwards too, to see him on the pro stage, play with the Broncos, but also just as we talked about this too, is who he shared the backfield with, and when he was on the Jump Around too. Let's put it this way: as if we were to go the Jordan, LeBron, Kobe, he called himself, or not called himself, but was very much cool with Jim Rutledge comparing him to Kobe in terms of RBU. If your career is Kobe Bryant-esque, if that's where you end up being as a Wisconsin Badger, I think that's a win. He was electric. He was fun. And the great thing about that, too, was that backfield was just absolutely loaded. So as fun as it would have been to watch him be the primary, it was just fun to watch everybody bounce off of each other.
Part of those backfields with James White, John Clay, like it was just incredible watching Montee Ball do what he did at the University of Wisconsin. I was in college when he was a running back and was featured here at the University of Wisconsin, and watching him every Saturday from afar, it was just amazing to see. And then getting to know him after his playing days too, as a teammate here at ESPN Wisconsin, part of ESPN Wisconsin College Game Day for several years, and just the various shows like the Jump Around that he's been able to be part of. It's great to know him, the person, and understand what his journey has been. You know how much this means to the man, Montee Ball, that he has this honor now going into the College Football Hall of Fame. Well deserved. Second all-time in rushing touchdowns, third all-time in scrimmage touchdowns touchdowns in college football history. When you're getting compared to Barry Sanders, when you're tying records held by Barry Sanders, yeah, you belong in a college football Hall of Fame.
I love that. And I wanted to, this was something that I was trying to figure out. We were talking about this in show prep too. I know, Jesse, you said you had a story about this he was referred to as Monty many times in the college broadcast, and he didn't really make the correction until he made it to the pros. And I was watching Sunday Night Football freshman year of college when he was with the Denver Broncos, and they have those player intros. And then when he comes up, you see him, it's Monte Ball. And that threw me off because I knew him as Monte Ball when I was watching him in college highlights.
So I had heard it both ways, and when I first hosted ESPN Wisconsin College Game Day with him, I said Monte. Okay, but I said, I think I called him Monte. I don't actually know because I'd heard it both ways. I said, how do we say your name? I've heard it both ways. Broadcasts, I've gone back and checked. I hear you say it, but what is it? And he said, well, I just kind of roll it. Both work. I'm like, it's your name. You have to have a preference of how you say your name. You can't just say, whatever you guys want to call me. That's not how names work. So, yes, Monte Ball is actually how he preferred to. Obviously, that is the name. So, Monte Ball, again, the 6th Badger to be inducted since 2010. College Football Hall of Fame. Congratulations to former Wisconsin Badgers running back Monte Ball. Some of the big news from a week ago that we get to celebrate here today on the Jump Around on the ESPN Madison YouTube channel. While we're on Badger football, a couple other thoughts. Some of the coordinators talking with the media yesterday here in downtown Madison. The most notable, I would say, is the new offensive coordinator, Jeff Grimes, coming over from Kansas and getting a chance to check out what he's going to be all about. Pablo, you know a little bit about Jeff Grimes. What are your thoughts on the new coordinator coming to Madison?
Yeah, I was actually picking the brain with one of my friends who writes for the Kansas City Star, covered Jeff Grimes over the last few years with the Jayhawks offense, and he really felt like that this was not a match made in heaven, but pretty close to it because of the style that Wisconsin has been historically known for, that ground and pound, that run-heavy type of offense, and that's what Jeff Grimes can bring into here. He still likes to have fun with the athleticism and passing, but if Wisconsin really wants to get back to who they've been known, i.e., when Monte Ball was around here, known for the RBU, that ground and pound, I go back to it, that hard-nosed running style, this is what Jeff Grimes can bring to the side for Wisconsin football, and I'm excited for it. I think the other side of it, too, is that the issues to an extent with the air raid offense and the schemes that Phil Longo had, he's a smart offensive coordinator, but it just felt like with the recruits and the guys that they had at offensive line, it just wasn't working with how fast the offensive line moved and the shifts. I think this is a much better fit, and let's see what happens in spring ball, too, when we get a little bit of a taste of it. Did Luke Fickell make the right choice with the offensive coordinator, Jeff Grimes? I feel like based off of what we've seen on paper, this is the guy that you want to go with.
That's what we heard coming into the season. Outside of once the hire was official, we heard this is a much better fit for the Wisconsin scheme. This is what Wisconsin's all about, getting back to its roots. And now hearing him talk yesterday, one of the quotes that stood out, toughness over tactics. I think the last couple of seasons as Badger football fans, we saw the tactics that didn't quite come to fruition, and we didn't see the toughness up in the trenches. We didn't see the toughness after contact with the running game and whatnot. We need to get back to seeing that and what makes Wisconsin special, going back to when Barry Alvarez turned the program around. We've heard Luke Fickell say he wants to be about toughness. Now we get to see it with a better scheme in place. I think that's what I'm most excited about seeing for the 2025 version of the Wisconsin football offense.
Yeah, you almost took the words right out of my mouth, too, with Luke Fickell, and I could just see as the season went on, the frustration and all that. One of the questions in a post-game press conference, his answer was that guys just need to keep making plays. He knows that everybody's going through the motions, they're doing the right things in practice, but at the end of the day, when it comes down to Saturdays, you have to make the plays. And that's where I believe, at least from that statement, he was sensing that, not lack of toughness, but just more of guys just got to go after it. You want to be strategic. You want to have those tactics, yes, but if you're not executing, then what's the point, honestly, at the end of the day? So that, I think, hopefully pushes Wisconsin into the right direction in terms of that toughness over tactics.
One of the other notable moves that's happened here this offseason is the former wide receivers coach, Kenny Guiton, has made the switch over to be the quarterbacks coach. I'm excited for that. Kenny Guiton was a quarterback at Ohio State. I remember watching him play. I was like, this dude's pretty good. He got kind of sandwiched between a bunch of good Ohio State quarterbacks, so I think he's kind of forgotten in the lore of Buckeye football, like what he actually did. But I'm really excited to see what Kenny Guiton brings as now the quarterback's coach at Wisconsin, to see if that position can evolve in the Jeff Grimes offense. Get back to not necessarily game managing. I still want to see more from that position than what we may have seen for the better part of 2 decades, but I'm really excited to see if Kenny Guiton can put his stamp, his fingerprints on that position group and see if the quarterback room can evolve for the years to come.
Yeah, I feel like it's already translated. As soon as he stepped onto campus in the wide receiver room last year, you could tell he's a young prospect. He's a younger guy. He gets the room. He's fresh. And I think he brings that good energy. Actually, one thing that stuck out to me with his initial press conference when he talked to media was he never wants to use the word almost in the room, and that's because he wants guys to, it's all or nothing in his eyes. You either make the play or you don't, and that's why he said, hey, you almost got it there. And he always refrains from using that word in his room, and he was adamant about it, but he was fun too. He brings that intense but loose energy at the same time too. It's a fair balance. He wants to have fun. He wants guys to enjoy the game, but hey, he's like, we're here to do a job at the end of the day, and we got to make plays and we got to win football games.
That's actually really fascinating, because if you want to describe how Wisconsin Badgers football fans have felt about the program for so long, it's really that in a nutshell. You don't want to say almost. You don't want to say Wisconsin almost made the college football playoff. Wisconsin almost won a Big Ten championship game. Wisconsin almost is on the same level as some of the top dogs in the sport. Wisconsin almost got it right with Luke Fickell. Like, that is kind of what the conversation has been for the better part of a decade and a half now. And so for Kenny Guiton to say that about the offense and the quarterback specifically, that stands out to me. I love that approach. That's fascinating stuff that you're sharing.
Yeah, and again, because what his background is too, when he was with Ohio State and all that, he brings, again, I just love the young, fresh energy that he's going to bring to this group. He always loves to try to bring the best out of everybody, too. You saw it in Tretch Kahuna. I just sense the excitement, too. Of course, it would have been fun to have Will Pauling this upcoming season, but there's a lot of potential with Tretch Kahuna in the wide receiver room, but now that he's moving into the quarterback's room, he's working with these guys that I think this is a good situation, too, because you bring in Billy Edwards, you bring in these quarterback transfers. This is a brand new quarterback room. So I don't know exactly what to expect with the battles come spring and that development, but it is exciting to know that they have a guy who knows the system, or knows the culture more so. And instead of bringing in this new face completely and almost kind of starting from ground zero, this is probably the best move that Luke Fickell could have made, to bring in a guy who was at a different position group, but has played this position in college, and bringing in these new transfers who are getting used to the culture, a guy who already knows exactly what Camp Randall and what Wisconsin is all about. This is a good situation.
So that's everything except Xavier Lucas on the state of Badger football. We're going to talk plenty about the transfer portal and what's going on with the Xavier Lucas situation about 15 minutes from right now. Shehan Jeyarajah of CBS Sports College Football Writers scheduled to appear here coming up on the Jump Around on the ESPN Madison YouTube channel. We hear comments from Barry Alvarez, all kinds of stuff. We're going to dive further into that component of the state of Badgers athletics. Jesse Nelson, Pablo Iglesias, the Jump Around on the ESPN Madison YouTube channel. Let's jump around and talk a little Badger basketball. How fun was it? Even though it was a loss, first time in 8 games that the Badgers lost, snapped a 7-game winning streak. Tuesday night, Pauley Pavilion. Wisconsin and UCLA squaring off in a really fun college basketball game. Bruins win at 85-83. Again, it snaps a 7-game winning streak for Wisconsin men's basketball. They played UCLA tough. The two teams, different approaches, but kind of they feel like they're on the same tier at this point in the Big Ten season. Wisconsin's record a little bit better. We'll talk about that in a moment. But Pablo, we both watched the game Tuesday night. What stood out to you from Wisconsin's game in LA against the Bruins?
I mean, the fact that you could drop 83 points on the road, I think we are just always fascinated by this Wisconsin Badgers offense. I think there is something to be said, though, about whether or not this is... It's not Wisconsin basketball compared to the years in past with defense and everything, and knowing that it was always the grinded out type of victory. You'd hardly break. Who's going to break 80? The team that breaks maybe even 70 will probably win this game. But it is exciting too, because I tweeted at some point too, John Tanji going to the line. I don't think I've seen a more acrobatic miss. It's just fun that the energy that he brings. John Blackwell too, to quote Ben Brust, who was on here a couple weeks ago, he's not a shot taker, he's a shot maker, and he is just consistently transcended and keeps moving up. And I'm so impressed with John Blackwell with the leap that he's made over to this season. What stood out to me though too was the defensive deficiencies. When a backup center has those numbers, that's not a great situation though either. I can't say that this is a sunshine and rainbows situation for the Wisconsin Badgers. There are some things that I have to take away. So can they stay tough down low? Greg Gard has pointed this out too, that after the Illinois loss, he got on Stephen Crowell. He said that we need to get tougher. He said he knows that the guys know that I love them and I know that they love me, but also he was not afraid to get in on them and make sure that you guys got to stay physical. You guys got to stay tough, because if you give up a bunch of points in the paint, that's going to hurt them.
Primetime Ryan Wollersheim is as dialed into college basketball as anybody here at ESPN Madison. Prime, did you know anything about Andy Mara before Tuesday night?
You mean the Andy Mara who was averaging 4.3 points per game and 9.1 minutes played before Tuesday night's game? Of course. Yeah, what? No, I have a lot of stock in him and his future growth with the Bruins.
22 points for Andy Mara on Tuesday night. And if you want to see, you circle one stat. Every time you watch the Badger men's basketball team play, I feel like when they lose, you can circle one thing in the box score. And on Tuesday night, it was Andy Mara, 22 points. That's the outlier.
Yeah.
Prime, do you have confidence that they're going to be able to overcome, like Pablo pointed out, these defensive deficiencies over the course of the remainder of the regular season in time for March?
I had started feeling better about it because since Greg Gard kind of called out Stephen Crowell, I can't remember the game, Illinois game, right? Where he had 0 rebounds?
Yes.
Yeah, it was the Illinois game.
Truly impossible. I think Greg Gard was flummoxed about it too. But since then, he'd been playing really well. I think he was averaging a little over 10 points per game. His defense was pretty strong. And on top of that, Crowell's playing well, but it's nice that they have 2 true 7-footers who can play and can see consistent minutes with him and Nolan Winter. And I do like when they go to their big lineups, but Nolan's young, and Crowell I think it's his 5th season now with the Badgers. It's kind of been the same story for him. He is not the physical defensive presence below the hoop that you need, especially against, there's going to be a lot of teams in the Big Ten like that, UCLA, and when it comes March, every little flaw you have is going to get exposed against good teams. And that's, when they have a flaw that is that big with the big men, then I do think it's going to be something that worries me about them getting out the first weekend.
So here's what makes me nervous yet about Wisconsin men's basketball as we get set for what we hope will be. They're a top 25 ranked team. They probably, if they win the games they're supposed to win here throughout the rest of the season, they're going to hang around kind of where they are right now in the AP ranks. It feels like this 15 to 25, somewhere in that range feels like where they will be throughout the rest of the regular season. They're not on the same tier as Michigan and Michigan State right now at the top of the Big Ten, but they are on the same tier with Illinois. They're right there with Maryland. They have a good matchup with them on the road next week. That'll be a good measuring stick game to see how they square up against the Terrapins. There's a few other teams that are right on the same tier with Oregon is coming up on the schedule. That's another one. Purdue. What makes me nervous is they are, in my mind, somewhat dependent, just watching that game on Tuesday night, but also the track record all season. They're somewhat dependent on making their three-point shots. Getting to the free throw line has been a strength, which I love. That is one of the staples of Wisconsin basketball. Make more free throws than the other team attempts. Going back to the Bo Ryan days, that has been a staple, and they've been much better at that this year, which has been awesome. One of the best free throw shooting teams in the nation. Three-point shooting in the NCAA tournament, when you're playing in larger arenas than you do in the regular season, if you do make a nice run, you get all the way to some of the bigger stadiums that you could play in. And granted, if they're playing in a stadium, that's amazing. That means they've made it really far in the tournament. But shooting can be questionable when you get to March Madness, when you get to the NCAA tournament. And if you have a cold night shooting, anybody can beat you. It's why mid-majors, Pablo and I both went to a mid-major. We understand this. When mid-majors can shoot from beyond the arc and be hot, you can beat anybody in the country. But when you're cold, you can get blown out by 30. And it doesn't matter who you're up against. So depending on who Wisconsin's matchup would be in the Big Ten tournament, in the NCAA tournament, the fact that they were so dependent the other night on shooting the three, and they live and die by it now, which is crazy to say for Wisconsin basketball, for where this was just even a couple of years ago. The fact that this is what it looks like this year, it's exciting, it's new. I don't want to be afraid of something that's brand new, but I am a little timid about what the ceiling can be for this team come tournament time because they're so dependent on their outside shooting.
You know, a thought that comes to me right now, and I want to know what you guys think too. It's a coulda, woulda, shoulda, but I feel like that this team's a lot more physical than last season, at least going into March. And who knows what the heck would have happened against that James Madison team, but I feel like that's what pushed them out of the building. They just were not as physical. James Madison came in and just swept Wisconsin up in New York, and that was flat out embarrassing, unfortunately, to watch. But I'm curious to know what you guys think, not to go too far off on this side. Do you think this team is much more physical, at least from what we saw on that one-game playoff? Going off what you're saying too, Jesse, is that you match anybody up with somebody at this situation, you never know what's going to happen. Do you think this team is a little more physical than last season?
I mean, I think it depends on your definition of physical.
Sure.
Because I think their ability to get to the basket looks a lot better. They're faster this year. They're stronger than last year. So physicality in that sense, I think, yes, offensively for sure. On the other side, they're allowing a bunch of, we just talked about, defensive deficiencies. To me, physicality needs to go both ways. And that's what makes me nervous, is that if you're going to outscore your opponents as opposed to playing strong lockdown, drain that shot clock type defense that we're used to seeing at Wisconsin, I don't want to be afraid of what's different, but I am a little nervous that a team can outrace them in the tournament. Prime, am I on board there with what my assessment has been so far watching this team this year?
I would agree across the board. I think you're right exactly about them being more physical offensively, but yeah, you just don't feel it defensively. And I try to think who's the stopper on this team right now? Is Carter Gilmore the best stopper? Maybe
who would have thought?
Truly, he might be the best guy to just match up across anyone, most versatile player. But and I also think of physicality in basketball. I think of the guys by the hoop, guys in the paint.
Right.
I just don't feel that way when I watch Steven Crowell or Nolan Winter, and I don't think any of the numbers back that up either.
Pablo, you asked the question, well, how do you define physicality? What do you see from this team?
Yeah, it does still go back to the defensive deficiencies. But I feel like offensively, from looking at these teams, they had scoring options, but starting back to when I started covering this team, I saw the Johnny Davis and Chucky Hepburn seasons. Those two guys were great. But if we saw it in the round against Iowa State, where Johnny Davis was already not 100%, then Chucky Hepburn goes down. You mentioned how much this team just depends on a couple guys, whereas offensively, there feels like there's a lot more weapons. It feels like that there's a lot more go-to guys. Somebody could take the shot, and then Carter Gilmore will swat somebody on the other side. But yeah, defensively, there needs to be a change in terms of that physicality. I guess what I see is that they're attacking the rim more. They're not trying to figure out, okay, who do we need to go to, whereas guys are not in the selfish way, but more so of a selfish, which is what they preach all the time. And even Kamari McGee, who actually stepped in when Max Klesmit was out, he had a career high in his first career start. It's a selfless style of ball offensively where they're hey, somebody's got to step up, and they're willing to step up, whereas not saying that they were timid offensively these last few years, but more so of they needed to figure out who the heck was their option going to be. Hey, it might be this guy's night. It might be that guy's night. I think going back to it, it's offensively, I feel like they're a lot more physical and they're a lot more go-getters, but we got to figure out something on defense now.
If you catch Wilde and Tausch every weekday from 9 to noon, you know I'm a big fan of prize picks that Tausch always tells you about. I love that it's difficult for me to play prize picks when it comes to the Wisconsin Badgers.
Yes.
Because that means on a given night, Steven Crowell, John Blackwell, Tanjay, Kleze, it could be anybody, depending on the matchup, that can help lead the team in scoring on a given night. That makes it fun because that means you're a well-balanced team that can go up against any style of opponent. But likewise, defensively, if you can't stop anybody because you don't know what your bread and butter is on that end of the court, then there could be some issues. And again, it comes down to shooting outside. If they can do that and they can do it consistently, they're at a great pace right now. Get to the free throw line, get the freebies, make your shots outside. I'm optimistic this could be a fun run come March this year for the Wisconsin men's basketball team. A couple of other notes before we do catch up with Shehan Jeyarajah of CBS Sports college football writer. Greg Gard, congratulations. Career win number 200 last week at the Kohl Center against the Ohio State Buckeyes. He is the third fastest Wisconsin men's basketball head coach to get to 200 career wins. Pretty cool for Greg Gard. A lot of grief that he gets every time the team starts to struggle, but nice job, I guess, for Coach Gard getting to 200 career wins.
Yeah, super awesome. He's had some talented teams, and he's worked with different types of teams too. I only have a short window of covering this Wisconsin basketball team and getting to see them, but even in these 4 years, I've seen them evolve in different ways. He's had an NBA lottery draft pick in Johnny Davis from what I've seen with him. He's taken the team to the tournament multiple years. They've had runs too. What impresses me the most is that I do ask him this question from time to time, and they're always somewhere in the latter end of the preseason predictions that they're not really a team that is expected to go anywhere, and then they make some noise, and now they're ranked in the AP poll all of a sudden. That I think is just what's so impressive about Greg Gard and what he's done over these years.
He's a very solid head coach. And Greg Gard, career win number 200 last week. Congratulations to Coach Gard and the Wisconsin men's basketball team. Going to be a fun couple of months here leading up until the big tournament. It's the Jump Around on the ESPN Madison YouTube channel. No Jim Rutledge today. Jesse Nelson, Pablo Iglesias stepping in with you. Now it's time to talk about Xavier Lucas. Transfer portal and what the future of college football may look like, influenced by the Wisconsin Badgers. So for a little context, before we do talk with CBS Sports college football writer Shehan Jeyarajah coming up in just a couple of moments, first, let's hear from Barry Alvarez. So, former Wisconsin Badgers head coach and director of athletics, Barry Alvarez. You can catch him every week on the Great Dane Huddle with Barry Alvarez on the ESPN Madison YouTube channel, also on 100.5 ESPN, typically on Monday nights. They were on Tuesday this week because of the holiday on Monday. So, Barry Alvarez, the first thing that he said about this was actually about the impression that it could leave about Wisconsin athletics. I think this is an interesting component of this discussion before we even get into the weeds of what's all happening with Xavier Lucas in the transfer portal. Wisconsin wanting to, I don't know if put the hammer down is the right way to say this, but they want to play by the rules that are in play. They want to maybe find what the line is for some of the rules for transfer portal, but will that leave athletes looking at Wisconsin differently than they had up until this point? Here is what Barry Alvarez said about that on the Great Dane Huddle on ESPN Madison just a couple of nights ago.
Does that look good for the university to be in this situation? Because I think, Wisconsin's motto is forward, and this is an important, paramount part.
Coach said it. There's going to be a precedent that's going to be set
from this.
Yeah, that's really important.
It's very important, but it might be a tough look. As a fan, I think I might rather be watching this happen at Michigan State or at Minnesota. It feels like it could hurt the recruiting track for me.
I don't think so. I don't think so.
No, it won't. You're up front with the people. When you recruit, you're up front with people. They ask you what happened, you tell them what happened. This is why we're going through this issue. We had an agreement. They broke the agreement. We're not going to stand for that.
Barry Alvarez on the Great Dane Huddle with Barry Alvarez every week on the ESPN Madison YouTube channel and on 100.5 ESPN. Pablo, I can't tell if that's Barry Alvarez just expressing the confidence that we've come to know from Coach, or if that's legitimately how those conversations take place in the homes when you go meet these athletes that are the future recruits and the lifeblood of your program. What did you take away from what Coach Alvarez said there?
Yeah, I respect what he had to say, because maybe in the short term it hurts Wisconsin because they're taking a stand, they're doing something that's a little different than what we've known as in this short window of the NIL transfer portal is the outside of the norm and speaking out and trying to, whether or not this goes to court, we'll see what happens. But from the long term, I think it's actually a good situation because somebody's stepping up, somebody's saying something. Just because you're the black sheep in this situation, that doesn't mean you're going to be the black sheep forever. Wisconsin is, I believe, at least it feels like to me, is setting a precedent because he has said that, and I know that Barry said this on the show too. It's the Wild West right now. It's the Wild West, and there needs to be some control. There needs to be some regulation, and at the moment right now there isn't much. And heck, even going back to when Jim Leonard was the interim coach, too. I remember after the Iowa loss, he had pointed out that there was some tampering issues. He was not afraid to say this, too. So this was 3 years ago when this had been happening. This isn't the first time that something like this has been happening in college football, but the fact that this is the first public thing, I don't see an issue with Wisconsin raising a couple flags and saying that, look, this is what's happening. We're going to call some people out on it. We're not trying to ruin someone's career, but it's the bigger picture here. So like I said, small picture, maybe it does hurt for a couple recruits that are looking for something else, but Barry's also the straight shooter too, and it really comes down to everybody's looking for something different. And I think long-term, whether it's for Wisconsin or college football and even the NCAA as a whole, too, with college athletics, I think big picture, long-term, this is a good thing.
I love it. But people also call me the hall monitor around here, so I don't know if my opinion directly matters. So we're going to talk to Shehan Jeyarajah, coming up from CBS Sports college football writer. He's going to tell us more about this situation. Coming up next here on the Jump Around, Shehan is brought to us by Steinhoffel. Start the new year off right with a new Tempur-Pedic mattress from Steinhoffel. And on a cold week like this, just bundling up and getting under the blankets of that new Tempur-Pedic mattress, that sounds good. Discover the advanced pressure-relieving power of a Tempur-Pedic, making aches and pains a thing of the past. Right now, you can get a new Tempur-Pedic mattress for just $52 a month when you use Steinhoffel's 60-month financing. Plus, you get $300 in Steinhoffel's cash. Don't overpay for a good night's sleep. Steinhoffel's, your mattress destination. Shop in-store or online. More on the Xavier Lucas transfer portal situation coming up next on the Jump Around on ESPN Madison's YouTube channel.
Steinhoffel's football scratch-off sale is back. Grab a scratch-off card in-store for your shot at an extra 3 or 5% off your purchase of sofas, bedroom, dining, and so much more. Transforming your space into something amazing has never been more affordable with Steinhoffel's 18-month 0% financing. Don't wait. Get in today and save big. The football scratch-off sale is happening now. Shop in-store or online at steinhoffels.com.
It's the Jump Around on the ESPN Madison YouTube channel. Jesse Nelson, Pablo Iglesias in for Jim Rutledge this week and talking more about the Xavier Lucas transfer portal situation. He's going to Miami by skipping the portal entirely, and it could set a new precedent in college football and college sports. We are joined now by Shehan Jeyarajah, CBS Sports college football writer. Shehan, thanks so much for taking the time and joining us today to shed your insights on this situation. First of all, how are you on this beautiful Thursday?
I'm doing great. Thankfully, I'm down in Texas, but we missed some of the snow. So I don't know how exactly we got this all backwards, but we're doing great. Thank you.
I was going to ask you where you were joining us from, because based on Florida and Texas are getting snow. We just got a dusting yesterday here in Madison, but it wasn't even that bad for the first few months of winter. So it's been crazy. And speaking of crazy, let's talk about the college football landscape and the transfer portal. What is going on with Xavier Lucas heading down to Miami? Because this is... we're on the cusp potentially of starting a brand new chapter of college sports, it feels like, based on what the ruling is that comes from this situation.
No, I mean, this is the big thing, right? Is the big question is going to be, how far does everyone want to take this? Because it could just be a warning shot, right, from Wisconsin to say, we don't like the way that this was handled. We want this to be addressed. This could turn into a huge lawsuit where potentially at issue would be whether the idea of a player being able to leave a rev share agreement would be on the table. Because what Wisconsin is essentially claiming is that these revenue sharing agreements, which technically cannot be finalized until after the House v. NCAA case is finalized in April, that these will be binding. And not only would that be a huge precedent to set for Xavier Lucas in Wisconsin, it would be a huge precedent to set for the future of college football if they could essentially make the case to the courts that these revenue sharing contracts need to be executed and are essentially binding. That's completely up in the air right now. Nobody at this point has challenged it because this is the first time that we've ever really seen these revenue sharing agreements since they're only set to take effect in 2025. Now, what the courts could do if it does go to trial is they could say, look, in this individual case of Xavier Lucas, where you have a contract and a memorandum of understanding essentially that can only be enforced after the House v. NCAA deadline, that before it, because we are still not at that point as yet, maybe they just say, well, in this case, it doesn't apply. It can't be binding at this point. But certainly, again, it comes down to how far everybody wants to push this.
Shehan, I know this is unprecedented right now. This is, as you said too, and we were even talking about this is the first time that a school has ever, an institution has ever come out, and heck, even the Big Ten Conference backing up Wisconsin. Let's talk about Wisconsin first. Do you think that a move like this hurts the brand, or do you think this is a good move for Wisconsin to jump out and say, hey, we are not going to take this?
No, I don't think it necessarily hurts the brand. Again, somebody has to be first, and you're going to deal with both the positive and the blowback of that situation. But I don't think that recruits will look around and say, look, we're not going to pick Wisconsin because, whatever, they're not supporting their kids. Now, I do think that there is value. Like, I think if somebody like Kenny Dillingham at Arizona State, who's been very forward of, if you want to leave, we're going to support you. We're going to be very visibly and vocally supportive of you. I think there are benefits to that. But I don't think it necessarily hurts Wisconsin to say, we feel like we have contracts in place. We feel like we've promised you something and we want to back it up. Because the reality is most players who are transferring into the program aren't necessarily thinking of what's going to happen when they try to get out.
The Big Ten specifically calling out the ACC in their official statement. That was what was fascinating to me, because especially when you see like the evolution of the college sports landscape, who's to say Miami in a couple of years isn't going to want to join the Big Ten if it comes to it, with the ACC kind of being in the state that it's in? Shehan, what stood out to you from that statement specifically? Because each component of each layer of this is so fascinating to me.
No, you're absolutely right. And there's such a power struggle going on right now between essentially the SEC and the Big Ten and everybody else. And, I used the word warning shots earlier, but really every single part of this is warning shots. You mentioned, of course, Miami, if they're looking for a new destination, if they ever want to leave the ACC. You mentioned, of course, with just the Big Ten versus ACC dynamics. And these dynamics impact things, obviously, in the context of the college football playoff, in terms of the revenue model, even in terms of, the Big Ten having very powerful television partners as well, and that really have some ability to impact the way that the sport is impacted. So again, a big part of this is just how far do people want to take this? Because the Big Ten is kind of coming out and saying, and they did it very quickly, I may point out too. They weren't shy about going out and putting out a statement immediately. But how far do people want to take this? Do people want to take this to, if Wisconsin, for example, sues Xavier Lucas and sues Miami or something of the like, does the Big Ten get in on this? Does the SEC get in on this? Do any of the television networks get in on this? This can turn from a small deal into a big deal really, really quickly.
Yeah, with the way that things are kind of going with the conference and how it's changing and all that too. But the transfer portal, with the process that Xavier Lucas has gone on to go to Miami, take himself out of classes at Wisconsin, Shehan, I'm curious, do you think that, not saying that this is the end of the transfer portal, but do you think there are going to be some changes, some new rules, some regulations? What's your thought on the way that Lucas ended up going to Miami?
Well, it's a unique one for sure. I don't necessarily know that it's going to have huge long-term effects because, again, when you look so far at the rest of college football, even these programs and situations where maybe they have signed rev share agreements, it's very rare that a player is denied the right to be put into the transfer portal. And all the transfer portal does from a logistical standpoint is exactly that. It deals with logistics, right? It deals with, hey, your name is out there, your contact information is out there. It's a public indicator that this is happening. Because there are downsides and risks to unenrolling from a school, because then again, you have to deal with some of the logistics of moving over documents, moving over transcripts, things of that nature as well. So I don't necessarily know that there's going to be some giant precedent that's set by this, because again, I think the bigger picture precedent is Wisconsin just refusing to put them in. That's something that I think is going to be fascinating. And look, I think that, Darren Heitner, who of course is Xavier Lucas's attorney at this point, he said essentially in that memorandum of understanding for the rev share agreement, it was incumbent on him, one, being in school and enrolled at a certain point, and two, the approval of the House v. NCAA document. So they basically attacked both of those things in order to try to get out of this agreement, both unenrolled from the school and also did it before the House agreement went into effect. I don't know that this is going to be a precedent that necessarily is involved the same way heading forward.
I know it's such a difficult thing to try and predict what the outcome will look like. CBS Sports college football writer Shehan Jeyarajah joining us here on the Jump Around. I think what ultimately is going to happen here is he's going to play at Miami, but he may not be able to make NIL money until the terms of that agreement are done. What do you think of that prediction of this, or do you have a different way that you see this scenario ultimately playing out when it's all said and done?
Well, some of it has to do with the verbiage, right? We don't necessarily have all of that information right now. But I do think ultimately that a court will look at this situation and, one, point out the fact that the House v. NCAA case was not confirmed at this point, which I think that they can make a pretty compelling case that means that it wasn't legally enforceable at this point. The other thing, too, is that, look, when you look at NIL contracts, which are going to be different than rev share contracts, absolutely, but NIL contracts were really not dependent as well on pay for play, essentially, on the idea of a guy being enrolled at an individual school. That will be different with revenue share, but the question is the enforcement aspect of it. So from my perspective, I think the courts are going to try to punt on it, not necessarily make the giant sweeping decision at this point. And I think they'll say, hey, you know what, he got out of that contract before the contract was necessarily eligible to happen. Because the other piece of this, too, is that at this point, nobody else has tried to essentially get out of a rev share agreement. Because, again, Xavier Lucas at this point is the only one who's publicly kind of been announced as doing that. And heading forward, when we get to the post-spring transfer period, that'll happen only after House v. NCAA is officially settled and decided. So I could see the courts ultimately punting on it and saying, look, hey, Wisconsin, you make some good points. Hey, Xavier Lucas's camp, you make some good points. But right now, we're just going to say that this is not enforceable right now, and we're going to punt a long-term issue until down the road.
Shehan, I'm curious, too. I know we've been saying rev share a lot. Rev share. So for the folks at home, too, I wanted to get some explanation on that and what this means for players moving forward.
Yeah, that's a great question. And so, when we look back at the NIL era, dating back to 2021, schools kind of weren't formally allowed to have contracts with players. What they would do is they had these third parties called collectives, and players would sign endorsement contracts with these collectives that would essentially function as a pay-per-play, but it wouldn't necessarily be part of the organization. If you're a politics buff, think of it as a super PAC. That's essentially what a collective is. Now, what they're doing instead, after this settlement, which is like this giant settlement that deals with the last couple of years of name, image, and likeness of college football, and really all college athletes as well, is that they're saying it is legal now to pay per play, to revenue share money with athletes. Now, they're doing it in such a way where they won't formally be considered employees as well, which comes with a whole nother level of complications. But it means that schools can complete direct pay-per-play contracts with athletes on campus. So, for example, you might hear, a very famous case going on right now is that of Darian Mensah, the Tulane quarterback who transferred to Duke, and he signed reportedly a $4 million contract. Well, that's coming out of an assigned revenue share, most likely. Now, it might be supplemented with outside collective and NIL money, but it's primarily coming from a direct pay-per-play. So the argument that Wisconsin is making essentially is that we are directly coming into an agreement with this individual player to play football at our school. And if he chooses to leave voluntarily, he's breaking the terms of that contract and essentially causing us distress.
And all this being said, Ohio State won the national championship 3 nights ago. That's the state of the sport right now, it feels like. It's wacky, it's wild, but that's what makes it so fun. Shehan Jeyarajah, thank you so much for taking the time and sharing your insight on this situation. It is so fascinating to see how this is going to continue to develop. And, us as Wisconsin Badgers fans here are going to be interested to see what happens long term and how this impacts the sport as a whole. Thanks so much for your insights. We appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for having me.
Shehan Jeyarajah, CBS Sports college football writer, joining us on The Jump Around here on the ESPN Madison YouTube channel. The Xavier Lucas situation, Pablo, is one that is going to likely impact the sport and college athletics as a whole long term. And I'm proud and nervous simultaneously that Wisconsin is on the front edge, the cutting edge of this situation. Because I think they're trying to draw the line and say we need to have some regulations, some rules going on here. We need to be able to hold people to agreements and hold people accountable. But at the same time, I do hope that the perception of Wisconsin isn't impacted depending on how this plays out.
Yeah, nobody wants to be the person who has to speak up and do all these things, but this is very much a necessity. In how fast things are changing, in where things are going, the wild west, as to just quote Barry too from the Great Dane Huddle. it is a Wild West situation. And if Wisconsin, which is what they're doing now, is speaking up, getting the support from the Big Ten Conference, the Big Ten Conference also, frankly, making a few big swings
for sure
at the ACC and saying that enough is enough. If they solve everything from here, we figure it out as we go. But the fact that somebody is saying something and speaking up, excited for Xavier Lucas. He was fun to watch this season. I don't think that by any means in this situation should we, I guess to use a better word, hopefully, but vilify. We should not be pointing the finger at Xavier Lucas. This is just a situation that we're in college football. It's not like that this is something that he created and went out and just did like totally on his own. This is where, there were a lot of warning signs with rules and regulations. How is this going to be regulated? I think this is good that Wisconsin's getting their foot forward and getting that support once again, like I said, from the Big Ten Conference to speak up and hopefully see some change down the road.
Before we let you go, because I don't want to leave on this note, because this is a heavy thing that we're talking about here. So here's something fun we're going to leave with. Wisconsin women's hockey, still number 1 in the country. The Badgers ranked number 1. Big home games this weekend, Saturday and Sunday against St. Cloud State. They're the number 11 ranked team in the country. They're sold out. You can't go if you don't have tickets already. It's at LeBron Arena. Teddy Bear Toss.
Yes.
First time ever, the women's hockey team going to feature the Teddy Toss, just like the men do at the Kohl Center every December. The women have it this Saturday against St. Cloud State. Bring your teddy bears. All goes for a great cause. Toss those teddies out onto the ice once that match wraps up. Can't wait to see them in action, but probably you had a chance to catch up with the women's hockey team a couple of weeks ago. They are on a mission to win a natty this year.
They are just locked in left and right, and what's so cool about their locker room vibe is that Mark Johnson is very cool, calm, and collected. You get nervous. There always feels like, and the players even know this too, whether they're the top ranked team or in the top 5, there always feels like that there's this target on the back for Wisconsin hockey players. But Mark Johnson and his approach just calms everybody in that locker room, and they know that they are locked in. They're ready to go. They're so exciting. Loved watching Layla Edwards since watching her as a freshman and getting to cover her. She has emerged as not just one of the best players in college hockey, but arguably one of the best players in the country as a whole in the future of USA hockey. The talent galore on this roster is just beyond belief. We are frankly spoiled with what this roster and the talent across the country and even in the world of hockey. This is going to be fun. St. Cloud State's also a respectable program. They love to circle this matchup on their calendar. So it's going to be a fun weekend. And like I said, I love the tenacity, but also just staying calm. That's how they love to carry things.
Did you have a favorite teddy bear or stuffed animal as a kid?
That's a good question. I'm sure I did. You remember what happened to the Build-A-Bear era? Like, is Build-A-Bear still around? Those were always fun.
Yeah, everybody loves a good Build-A-Bear.
Corduroy was always fun.
It's always the most happening place if you go to a mall these days. It's like the Build-A-Bear is still going strong.
Paddington.
Prime, did you have a good teddy bear growing up?
Oh, I definitely had a lot of Build-A-Bear experiences.
Yeah!
I definitely built my own bear that I believe I called him Iggy. He was a koala bear, but as a child, I for some reason thought koala bears were called iguanas. And so, therefore, his name became Iggy. I also called Lemonade Limeade. I was not great when it came to
you were
speaking
really
or being on a mic.
surprised.
Yeah.
Really surprised when you tried one or the other.
Exactly. It really hits you in the back of the mouth. Anyways, yeah. No, I had a great teddy bear. That's the only one I remember having though as a child.
I had blue elephant guy was what I named.
Nice.
It was a little blue elephant with like an orange and green like corduroy like sweater that he wore.
And that was his name?
I called him Blue Elephant Guy.
Blue Elephant Guy.
Yeah, and I
BEG.
one of several stuffed animals. In fact, I still cuddle a moose every now and then when I'm sleeping as a 33-year-old adult. And look, we're out of time. That's the Jump Around on the ESPN Madison YouTube channel. Jesse Nelson, Pablo Iglesias, Primetime Wollerside, Riley Aug. Special thanks again to CBS Sports college football writer Shehan Jeyarajah for joining us to share his insights on the Xavier Lucas transfer situation. Jim Rutledge returns next week. Thanks so much for joining us. The Jump Around on the ESPN Madison YouTube channel.